Cecilia Underwood learned to hate two things. 1. Lies, especially the ones she lived every day. 2. Gavin Hogan, her husband, who in public treated her like a queen and in private, like trash. The marriage was supposed to be theater for a year. Everything was business pretense. They never touched each other for months, but on the day it happened, a pregnancy was revealed. When she thought about announcing it, she heard him say, "Do you really think I'd be that stupid? Have a child with a woman like her? She's only good for what I need her for." That was carelessness, and I don't make mistakes twice. So Cecilia decided he would never know, because she would run far away from him with the secret, alone.
Hi, how are you? My name is Kay, and I'm the owner of this channel. I'm here because I wanted to come give a more than special thank you to our subscriber Strez, who made a donation to the channel. Thank you so much. Strez, this means a lot to me. And if you want to appear at the beginning of the video, just like Strez, just make a donation. And before we actually start the story, tell me, how far can a person truly change for someone else? Or does love not change anyone?
Chapter 1. Fake Marriage and Private Cruelty.
This is just a performance.
What happens when the audience disappears?
The black velvet of the dress scratched my skin like a constant reminder that this day was real. My father's funeral was happening right before my eyes, but I couldn't cry. Maybe it was the shock. Maybe it was the fact that the tears had dried up somewhere between the call from the hospital and the casket being lowered into the cold ground. I watched everything with empty eyes, feeling the black veil over my face like a fragile barrier between me and the world crumbling around me. My mother, Katerina, stood beside me, pale as death, her hands trembling as she held a handkerchief that was already soaked. She didn't look at me, and that bothered me more than it should have. I felt the weight of the silence between us, that kind of silence that precedes an inevitable storm. When the ceremony ended, and people started to disperse, murmuring empty condolences that I could barely process, my mother finally turned to me. Her eyes were red, but there was something more there, something that made me freeze inside. "Cecilia, we need to talk," she said with a trembling voice, and I felt my stomach turn. "The lawyer is waiting." Now, I didn't question, because questioning meant prolonging the inevitable, and I was already too tired to fight against whatever was coming. I followed my mother to the gloomy office of the family lawyer, a middle-aged man with thin glasses and an expression that screamed bad news. He offered us coffee that neither of us touched, and then he started talking about debts, mergers, and nervous investors. The words danced around the room like ghosts I couldn't hold on to. "Without your father, the investors are questioning the stability of the merger with the Hogans," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses as he flipped through papers that seemed to contain my family's fate. "They need guarantees, something that shows family commitment, something that goes beyond paper." I frowned, trying to understand where this conversation was going. But my mother already knew. I could see it in her eyes, in the way she couldn't look at me directly, that she had already made a decision without consulting me. "I proposed a solution," Katerina finally said, and her voice was so low I almost didn't hear it. "The Hogan family accepted." "What solution?" I asked, and I felt my heart race because some part of me already knew the answer, already felt the ground opening up beneath my feet. My mother closed her eyes for a second before responding, and when she opened them again, there were tears there, but also a cold determination that scared me. "You and Gavin Hogan, marriage. It will show the investors that the commitment between the families is real, that the merger is solid. It will calm the market." I stood up so fast the chair almost fell backward, and I felt the anger rising through my throat like bile. "You're selling me?" My voice came out louder than I intended, but I didn't care. "Like I'm cattle. Cecilia." My mother also stood up, and for the first time in weeks, she seemed alive, seemed desperate. "Without this, we lose everything. The company, the house, the family name. Your father left a mess, and this marriage saves both companies, saves us." "And me!" I shouted back, feeling the tears finally come, hot and furious. "My life, my plans. I'm not a bargaining chip." "It's for a year, just 1 year. She approached me, her hands extended as if she wanted to touch me, but I took a step back. "It's a contract. Then you're free, and we'll have saved everything your father built." I laughed, but there was no humor in that sound, only pure bitterness. "I 1 year of my life to save the legacy of a man who couldn't even save himself." The silence that followed was so heavy I could barely breathe, and then my mother said the words that made my world collapse completely. "I already signed, Cecilia. The wedding is next week." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under my feet, like the air had been sucked from my lungs. "You didn't even consult me," I whispered, and the betrayal hurt more than anything else. "Joyce, you made this decision for me, as if I were your property." "I did this to protect you," Katerina cried, and her tears were flowing freely now. "The choice was this or the street, and for both of us. I couldn't let you suffer, couldn't let everything we have disappear. Gavin seems like a good guy, and he promised me he wouldn't do anything you didn't want." I looked at my mother, at this woman I had loved all my life, and felt completely alone. I left that office without saying anything else, because there were no words to express the pain and anger that consumed every inch of my being. I had lost my father, and now I was losing my freedom, all in the name of a corporate merger I had never asked for. The week passed like a blur of meetings with stylists, photographers, and event planners who treated my wedding as if it were the event of the century. I could barely look at the white dress they hung in front of huge mirrors, because all of it seemed like an elaborate lie. I didn't know Gavin Hogan beyond the few times I had seen him at corporate events. Always impeccable, always distant, always with that cold look that revealed nothing. When the wedding day finally came, I found myself in front of the mirror, dressed in white like a real bride, but feeling like a fraud. The dress was beautiful. I couldn't deny it, but the woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger. I practiced the smile I would have to use, that perfect smile that said, "I'm happy," when in reality, I was dying inside. The ceremony took place in a huge church, full of investors, journalists, and people I didn't even know, all there to witness the union that would save two companies in crisis. I walked to the altar with my mother by my side, and each step seemed to take me further from who I really was. Gavin was there, waiting, impeccable in a perfectly tailored suit, his dark hair combed back, and those eyes that showed absolutely nothing. When I reached his side, he offered me his hand, and I accepted it because that's what was in the script. His hand was warm, firm, but there was no affection there, only the fulfillment of an obligation. The priest began the ceremony, and I barely heard the words because my mind was somewhere else, thinking about how I had gotten here, about how my life had turned into theater for investors. The vows came, and Gavin turned to me with that smile he must have practiced as much as I practiced mine. "Cecilia," he said, and his voice was soft, controlled, perfect for the cameras clicking around us. "I promise to love you, respect you, and build a future by your side." He kissed my hand and the cameras exploded in flashes of light, capturing that moment that would seem romantic to anyone who didn't know the truth. I forced my sweetest smile and repeated the words we had agreed on. "Gavin, I promise the same. To build something beautiful with you." The lie came so easily from my lips that I almost believed it for a second, but then I saw the investors smiling, satisfied, and remembered that all of this was just a show. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," Gavin leaned in and pressed his lips against mine in a chaste kiss, quick as but convincing enough to draw applause from the audience. I felt like a doll, moved by invisible strings, and the thought echoing in my mind was simple and devastating. This is my hell. The reception was even worse than the ceremony, because there I had to keep up the show for hours on end, smiling, laughing, pretending I was in love with the man by my side. Gavin played his part perfectly, holding my waist, pulling me close to him, smiling for the cameras as if I were the love of his life. Each of his touches was calculated, each smile was rehearsed, and I hated every second of it. "You're beautiful together," an investor said, approaching us with a glass of champagne in hand, his face red from drinking so much. "True love. It's beautiful to see." Gavin squeezed my waist hard, and I felt the pain radiate through my ribs, but I kept the smile on my face. "Yes," he said, his voice full of false tenderness. True love. We're lucky, aren't we, darling? I forced a laugh that sounded too natural to be comfortable. Very lucky, I responded, and saw the satisfaction on the investor's face before he walked away to drink more. As soon as the man was out of sight, Gavin released me as if I burned, and he leaned in to whisper in my ear, his voice cold and cruel. Smile more. You look like a hostage. I turned my face to him, keeping the smile for anyone who might be watching, but my words were venomous. Because I am, and so are you, and so am I, he agreed. But there was no empathy there, only a cold acknowledgement of the situation. So fake it better, we have an audience. He walked away to greet another group of investors, and I stood there, alone in the middle of a party celebrating a lie. I danced with him when they asked, smiled for photos that would be published in magazines, and repeated, "Thank you." So many times the word lost all meaning. The night dragged on like an eternity, and when we finally finished, I felt like I had run an emotional marathon. The Hogan mansion was even bigger than I imagined, all stone and glass, modern and cold like the man who was now my husband. The driver dropped us off at the entrance, and as soon as the door closed behind us, Gavin transformed completely. The smile disappeared, his posture relaxed, and he became the cold stranger I had only seen in flashes during the wedding preparations. He took off his tie with abrupt movements, as if it suffocated him, and walked to the staircase without even looking back. Your room is in the east wing, far from mine. We'll stay separated. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, because there was nothing to say. I followed a silent maid to the room that would be mine for the next 12 months, and when the door closed, I finally allowed the tears to fall. The room was beautiful, tastefully decorated, but it felt like a gilded prison. I sat on the huge bed and hugged my knees, feeling the crushing weight of reality. The knock on the door made me jump, and when I opened it, Gavin was there, still in his suit, but with his shirt partially unbuttoned. He entered without asking permission, and his presence filled the entire room, dominating the space in a way that made me instinctively back away. "We need to establish rules," he said, and his voice was so cold I felt a chill run up my spine. "I need to be clear about how this is going to work." I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to protect myself from that cutting coldness. "I'm listening." He walked to the window, hands in his pockets, and looked outside as if I wasn't even there. "Rule number 1. This is business. Theater for the investors. Out there, we're the perfect couple. In here, nothing. Absolutely nothing." Each of his words was a stab, but I kept my expression neutral, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing how it hurt me. "Rule number 2, he continued, still not looking at me. "Don't touch me. Outside of public events, you don't touch me. Ever." I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Trust me, I have zero interest in touching you." He finally turned to face me, and his eyes were so empty that for a moment I wondered if there was anything human behind that facade. "Rule number 3, don't expect real affection. That doesn't exist between us, and it never will." I felt the humiliation burn my cheeks, but I kept my chin up, refusing to show weakness. "Understood." "Rule number 4, he said, and there was something almost cruel in the way he spoke, as if he was enjoying establishing these rules that put me in my place. 1 year, the contract ends, we get divorced, you leave, and I forget you existed. Everyone's happy." The silence that followed was so heavy I could barely breathe, and I felt the tears threaten to return. But I pushed them down with all the strength I had left. "Perfectly clear," I managed to say, and my voice came out firmer than I expected. Gavin nodded as if he had solved a business problem and walked to the door. Before leaving, he stopped and looked back, and for a second I thought I saw something different in his eyes, but it was too quick to be sure. "There's an event tomorrow at 7 in the evening, he said, his voice returning to that irritating neutrality. "The stylist comes at 3. Wear whatever she tells you to. Smile, pretend. That's what you're good for." The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I finally crumbled. I slid down the wall to the floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and cried like I hadn't cried since I received the news of my father's death. I cried for the freedom I had lost, for the life I would never have, and for the cold man who now controlled every aspect of my existence. There, alone in that huge and empty room, I completely understood what I had become. A tool, a piece in a corporate chess game, and nothing more. And the worst part was knowing I had a whole year ahead of me, pretending to be happy next to a man who saw me as less than nothing.
Imagine your wedding being like this, so cold. Will Cecilia have a little more happiness in her life after this?
Chapter 2. Torturous Duality and Vulnerability.
How long can two strangers pretend to be in love before something real breaks through?
The weeks that followed the wedding turned into a routine as predictable as it was painful, and I quickly learned to live two completely different lives within the same existence. Duality became my new reality, and each passing day I felt more divided between the woman I pretended to be and the woman I really was. In public, Gavin Hogan was the perfect husband, the kind of man any woman would dream of having by her side. He kissed my cheek with calculated tenderness, held my hand as if I were the most precious thing in the world, and laughed in that way that made investors sigh with satisfaction. He called me love and darling, with an ease that would be impressive if it weren't completely fake. And I, like the good actress I had learned to be, returned each gesture with rehearsed smiles and loving looks that meant absolutely nothing. But when the doors closed and the cameras disappeared, the man by my side transformed into a cold stranger who barely acknowledged my existence. Dinners at the mansion were silent, so silent that I could hear the sound of silverware against porcelain echoing through the enormous hall. He didn't look at me, didn't speak to me unless it was strictly necessary, and the coldness that emanated from him was so intense that I felt like I was sitting next to an ice statue. I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, that I could survive that year of lies and loneliness, but the truth was that each day got a little harder. The mask I wore in public was starting to weigh heavy, and there were moments when I caught myself forgetting who I really was underneath all that performance. I was Cecilia Underwood Hogan on paper, but inside I was losing myself bit by bit. The Investors' Charity Gala took place at a 5-star hotel downtown, and I prepared for another night of pretending with the same resignation as always. The dress the stylist had chosen was red, fitted to the body, elegant enough to impress but not so flashy as to steal the attention that should be on the perfect couple. I looked at myself in the mirror and practically didn't recognize myself because the woman staring back at me seemed confident, sophisticated, completely in control. But inside I was falling apart. Gavin was waiting for me in the car, impeccable as always in a black suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. He didn't even look at me when I got in, just checked his watch and motioned for the driver to move forward, and I settled into the leather seat trying to mentally prepare myself for the next few hours of theater. The event was exactly like all the others, full of important people talking about money and power, while drinking expensive champagne and pretending to care about charitable causes. As soon as we entered, Gavin made his usual metamorphosis, and his arm wrapped around my waist with a rehearsed familiarity that made my stomach turn. He pulled me close, and I forced myself to relax against his body, reminding myself that this was just another show. My wife is incredible," Gavin said to a group of investors who immediately surrounded us, and his voice was full of fake pride that sounded so real that even I almost believed it. "Smart, beautiful, everything a man could want. I'm a lucky man." He kissed my temple gently, and I felt the warmth of his lips against my skin. But there was nothing there beyond the performance. I smiled sweetly and placed my hand on his chest, feeling the fabric of the suit under my fingers, and forced my voice to sound loving. "Thank you, darling. You're wonderful too." The investors practically melted at our display of marital affection, and I heard the satisfied comments about how we were the perfect example that the merger between the families was solid and stable. We spent the whole night like that, glued to each other, smiling for cameras, exchanging empty affections that made others sigh with admiration, but that made me feel increasingly empty inside. There was a moment when Gavin pulled me onto the dance floor, and I had to suppress the urge to pull back when he put his hand on my waist and pulled me close to his body. We danced to the slow rhythm of the music, and to anyone watching from the outside, We seemed completely in love, lost in each other, but the reality was that I was counting the seconds until I could get away from him. "You're doing well," he murmured in my ear, and the tone of his voice was neutral, professional, as if he were evaluating an employee's performance. "Keep it up." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from saying something that would break the illusion, and just nodded slightly, keeping the smile glued to my face. When the music finally ended, I was emotionally exhausted, drained from pretending feelings that didn't exist. The ride back to the mansion in the car was tense in a different way than usual, and I felt the change in the air as soon as the doors closed and we were alone. Gavin immediately moved away from me, releasing my body as if I burned, and the mask of the perfect husband fell so quickly that it was almost shocking to see the transformation. "You touched too much," he said, and his voice was loaded with something that seemed like disgust. It was unnecessary, uncalled for, even excessive. I felt the anger rise through my throat, hot and suffocating, because it was always like this. He always found a way to blame me for following exactly the rules he himself had established. "You asked me to fake it better," I shot back, turning to face him in the back seat of the car. "You said I looked like a hostage, so I faked it better. Like you wanted. After all, geez, what do you want from me? I want you to pretend, not rub yourself all over me like you're my mistress," he responded, and his tone was cutting, cruel. "Have limits. Be more controlled." I laughed, but there was no humor in that sound, just accumulated frustration and anger from weeks of living that farce. "I'm disgusted too, you know," I exploded, and I didn't care that the driver was probably hearing every word, every touch of yours. Every fake kiss, it repulses me, so don't tell me I exaggerated when you're the director of this theater piece. Gavin looked at me, and for a moment I saw genuine anger in his eyes, the first real emotion I had seen since we got married. "Great," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "Feelings mutual. Now be quiet until we get home." The silence that followed was so tense that I felt like the air inside the car had become solid, heavy, almost impossible to breathe. I turned to the window and fixed my gaze on the city lights passing by quickly, trying to control my breathing and the tears that threatened to fall. I wasn't going to cry in front of him, wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing how all of this was destroying me inside. The weeks that followed were more of the same, and I started to wonder if I could really survive a whole year of that routine without completely losing my sanity. But then something changed. Something I didn't expect, and that broke the cold dynamic we had established. It was 2 in the morning when I went down to the kitchen looking for water, unable to sleep after another silent and awkward dinner. I saw the light on in Gavin's office, which was strange because he was usually already asleep at this hour, and curiosity made me walk over there. The door was ajar, and when I peeked inside, I saw Gavin sitting behind the huge desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him and a glass in his hand. He was different, his posture hunched, his hair disheveled, as if he had run his hands through it several times, and there was something in his expression I had never seen before. Vulnerability. Real pain. I knocked lightly on the door, and he looked up, his red and tired eyes meeting mine. "Get out, Em," he said, but his voice came out weak, without the usual conviction. I went in anyway, closing the door behind me, and approached slowly, as if I were dealing with a wounded animal. "You're drinking alone," I observed, and it wasn't a question. "What happened?" Gavin laughed, but it was a bitter sound, broken, completely different from the fake laughs he gave in public. "Why do you care?" he asked, taking another sip of whiskey. "You hate me." "I hate you. Why don't you just leave and let me suffer in peace?" I should have left him there drowning in his own misery, but something in me couldn't do it. Maybe it was because, despite everything, I understood what it was like to be broken and alone. "Even hating you," I said softly, sitting in the chair on the other side of the desk. "No one deserves to be like this. Alone. Suffering. Tell me what happened." He looked at me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether I was real or just another alcohol-induced hallucination, and then, to my surprise, he started talking. He told me about the partner who had betrayed the company, about the stocks that had plummeted, about furious investors demanding explanations and threatening lawsuits. He talked for over an hour, and I just listened, offering solutions when it seemed appropriate, using the knowledge I had acquired watching my father for years. "You understand?" Gavin finally said, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Business, strategy, market. I thought you were just a dumb doll, spoiled by daddy, but you really understand." The observation hurt, but I didn't let it show. "Everyone thinks that," I replied with a tired sigh. "Including you, but I learned from my father. I spent years listening to him talk about business, absorbing everything. I just never got a voice to show what I know." Gavin was silent, studying me with an intensity that made something stir in the pit of my stomach. "Cecilia," he began, and for the first time my name came from his lips without sounding like an accusation. I was... "Not today," I interrupted him, standing up and walking around the desk until I was beside him. "You're broken, exhausted, drunk. Today you just need to breathe and survive." I extended my hand and touched his face, and felt him stiffen for a second before relaxing under my touch. There was something different in the air between us, something charged and dangerous that I couldn't name. Gavin looked at me, and then his gaze dropped to my mouth, and I saw the exact moment the decision was made. He pulled me down and kissed me, and it wasn't like the chaste, calculated kisses we exchanged in public. This kiss was real, intense, desperate, full of a need that neither of us was willing to admit. I responded without thinking, because in that moment all the rules we had established seemed meaningless, and there was just the two of us and the alcohol and the vulnerability that had finally broken down the barriers. His hands found my waist and pulled me into his lap, and I settled there, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, our rapid breathing mixing together. "Stop," he whispered against my lips, but it didn't sound like an order. It sounded like a last thread of control breaking. "Stop now, or I won't be able to stop." I looked into his eyes, saw the vulnerability there mixed with desire, and made the decision that would change everything between us. "I want this too," I murmured, and it was all the permission he needed. What happened next was a confused mix of urgency and need, of barriers being destroyed and vulnerabilities being exposed. Gavin carried me to the leather couch in the corner of the office, and we lost ourselves in each other in a way that was simultaneously desperate and surprisingly delicate. Each of his touches was different from the calculated touches I had received in public. These were real, loaded with an intensity that left me breathless. I allowed myself to feel for the first time since I had gotten married, allowed myself to forget the rules and the theater, resigning myself to just exist in that moment. His hands explored as if memorizing every curve, every contour, and I arched against him, lost in sensations I didn't know I was capable of feeling. When we finally came together, it was as if the entire world stopped spinning for a moment.
Well, this chapter was definitely intense.
Chapter 3. Brutal regret and destructive words.
What if the words that destroy you are spoken by the father of your child?
I woke up wrapped in warmth, and for a glorious and confusing moment, I couldn't remember where I was. The strong arms around my waist were an anchor, keeping me tied to that state between sleep and wakefulness. And when I finally opened my eyes and saw the office bathed in the soft morning light, everything came back in a wave of memories that made my heart race. The previous night had really happened. It hadn't been just another torturous dream where things between Gavin and me were different. I turned my head slowly, afraid of breaking that fragile moment, and saw his face inches from mine, his eyes already open, watching me with an expression I couldn't fully decipher. There was something there that wasn't the usual coldness, something that looked dangerously like regret, mixed with an intense anger that seemed directed more at himself than at me. I tried to smile, tried to say something that would break the heavy silence that had settled between us, but before I could open my mouth, he pulled away abruptly. Gavin got up from the couch with quick, tense movements, and I felt the immediate cold of his absence beside me. He picked his shirt up from the floor and put it on with his back turned to me, and each of his movements was loaded with an urgency that made my stomach churn with anxiety. I sat up, pulling the robe around me as if it could protect me from whatever was coming, and waited for him to say something, anything that would explain the tension emanating from him in almost palpable waves. "Gavin," I began with my voice still hoarse from sleep. "About last night, I think It was a mistake," he cut me off, and his voice came out hard, cold, completely devoid of the vulnerability I had seen a few hours ago. "Alcohol. My weakness. I shouldn't have let it happen. It doesn't mean anything. Forget it." His words fell on me like icy stones, and I felt the warmth that still lingered in my body turn into pure ice. I forced a controlled breath and tried again, because some part of me still clung to that small hope that the previous night had meant something to him too. "But we connected," I insisted, and I hated how my voice sounded small, vulnerable. Like it was real, I felt it. "And you too." He finally turned to face me, and what I saw in his eyes made me instinctively back away. There was nothing there but calculated coldness and a cruelty that seemed to have been sharpened during the hours I slept peacefully in his arms. "We?" he repeated, and there was scorn in his voice. "There is no we, Cecilia. There's a contract. There's paper. You're a tool in this deal. And last night was just a moment of weakness on my part. Available body when I was vulnerable. Nothing more than that. Got it?" Each word was a precise stab, and I felt the tears burn behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall in front of him. The humiliation burned more than any physical pain could burn, and I swallowed the lump in my throat before responding. "I understand perfectly," I managed to say, and I was proud of how my voice came out firm despite the internal chaos. "Good," he said, already walking toward the door as if he couldn't get out of there fast enough. "And Cecilia, it won't happen again. Ever. I have standards, and last night was a mistake that won't be repeated. Now get dressed and get out of my office." The door closed behind him with a sound that echoed through the empty room, and it was only then that I allowed the tears to fall. I slid from the couch to the cold floor, hugging my knees to my chest, and cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a child, with sobs that tore at my throat and made my whole body shake. The previous night had been the first time in weeks that I had felt less alone, less lost, and he had destroyed everything with a few well-placed sentences. I stayed there for hours, until there were no more tears left to shed, and then I dragged my broken body to the bedroom and locked myself inside. If I thought Gavin had been cold before, the weeks that followed showed me that I didn't know even half of the cruelty he was capable of. He became worse, so significantly worse that sometimes I found myself wishing to go back to the first days of the marriage, when he just ignored me instead of actively making me feel like I was less than nothing. The coldness transformed into something sharper, more deliberate, and each interaction between us seemed calculated to remind me of my place. He avoided me in the mansion as if I were a contagious disease, changing direction when he saw me in the hallways, eating at different times so he wouldn't have to share the table with me, locking the office door whenever he was inside, as if he feared I might invade his space again. In public, we still maintained the farce because the investors needed to believe in the stability of our marriage, but even in those moments, I felt the difference. His touches were quicker, more impersonal, as if each second of physical contact was a torture he could barely stand. There was a night when I tried to start a conversation during a particularly silent dinner, desperate for any kind of human interaction after entire days without talking to anyone. "Gavin, I was thinking that maybe we could," I began, but he cut me off without even looking up from his plate. "I'm not interested in what you were thinking," he said in a monotone, mechanical voice. "Eat in silence. When you're done, go back to your room. That's the extent of our necessary interaction." I closed my mouth and finished eating in a silence so heavy I could barely swallow the food, and when I finally managed to escape to my room, I cried once again, because it seemed like that was all I knew how to do lately. The confusion consumed me, because I didn't understand why he had gotten so much worse after that night. Part of me wondered if he had felt something real and it scared him, but the bigger, more rational part knew he probably just felt disgusted with himself for giving in to a moment of weakness with me. 4 weeks after that night in the office, I woke up feeling nausea so intense I could barely get out of bed, so I ran to the bathroom and vomited violently. And when I finally managed to look at myself in the mirror, I saw a pale and exhausted woman staring back at me. Initially, I thought it was just stress, because living in that house with Gavin was stressful enough to make anyone sick. But when the nausea persisted day after day, accompanied by a tiredness that no matter how much I slept never went away, I started to worry. It was Isla who insisted I go to the doctor because she had returned from a trip and quickly become my only friend in that huge, cold house. "You look terrible, Cece," she said with her typical frankness, dragging me to the car. "And before you say it's just tiredness, I've already heard you throwing up 3 mornings in a row. We're going to the doctor, now." The appointment was quick and direct, and when the doctor came back with the test results, the smile on her face told me everything before she even opened her mouth. "Congratulations, Mrs. Hogan," she said with genuine enthusiasm. "You're pregnant. 4 weeks is by my calculations. Your baby is perfectly healthy." The world stopped spinning for a moment, and I felt like all the air had been sucked from my lungs. Pregnant. I was pregnant with Gavin Hogan's baby, the man who treated me like trash, who had used me that night and then discarded me as if I meant absolutely nothing. My hand automatically went to my still flat stomach, and the reality of the situation hit me with a force that almost knocked me off the chair. "Your husband doesn't know?" the doctor asked, and I shook my head, unable to form words. "Well, I'm sure he'll be thrilled with the news. Babies are always a blessing." I forced a smile that probably looked more like a grimace and accepted the prenatal vitamins she offered me, and during the entire ride back home, I remained in absolute silence, trying to process that information that changed everything. Isla tried to make conversation, but eventually gave up when she realized I was completely lost in my own thoughts, and when we finally arrived at the mansion, I went straight up to my room without saying a word. I spent hours sitting on the bed, my hand on my stomach, trying to decide what to do. Part of me knew I should tell Gavin immediately, because regardless of how things were between us, he was the father and had the right to know. But the other part, the part that still bled from the wounds he had opened with his cruel words, was afraid of his reaction, afraid of being rejected once again, and this time with much more serious consequences. Eventually, the rational part won, and I decided I would tell him that night. He deserved to know, and maybe, just maybe, the news of a baby would change something between us. It was a fragile and probably naive hope, but I clung to it with all the strength I had, because it was all I had left. I went down to his office around 8 at night, my heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. I mentally rehearsed what I would say the entire way, searching for the right words that could soften the impact of the news. The door was ajar, which was unusual because Gavin always kept it locked, and when I got closer, I heard voices coming from inside. I recognized Marcus's voice, Gavin's brother, and I was about to knock when I heard my name being mentioned. "Pregnant?" Marcus's voice echoed through the office, and I froze in the hallway, my hand suspended in the air about to knock on the door. "Your wife is pregnant, Gavin." The laugh that followed was so cruel, so completely devoid of any real humor, that it made my blood freeze in my veins. "I'd never be that foolish, Marcus," Gavin responded, and his voice was loaded with scorn. "Have a child with that woman. Do you really think I'd make such a monumental mistake?" I should have left at that moment, should have walked away from that door and spared myself from what was coming. But my feet seemed to have grown roots in the ground, and I stood there, paralyzed, hearing every word as if they were blades cutting my skin. "But you're married," Marcus insisted, and I could hear the confusion in his voice. "Eventually, that could happen." "The paper," Gavin cut him off impatiently. "Theater for idiotic investors who need to see a happy couple to feel secure about their investments. Nothing more than that." There was a pause, and then he continued, and every word that came out of his mouth was a stab to my heart. "Look, I slept with her once. It was a pathetic mistake. I was drunk, vulnerable, weak. She was there. Warm body. It was convenient, that's all." The tears started falling silently down my face, and I brought my hand to my mouth to muffle the sob that threatened to escape. My other hand instinctively went to my stomach, protecting the baby growing there from such poisonous words. "And since then," Gavin continued, and the disgust in his voice was so intense that I felt like I'd been thrown in ice water. "Disgust. disgust with myself for touching her. That woman I didn't even choose, who was shoved down my throat like I was cattle being traded. She's empty, superficial, a brainless doll that Daddy spoiled and who now finally had to face the real world. Gavin, that's very cruel. Marcus tried to intervene, but Gavin wasn't interested in listening. It's the truth, he practically shouted, and I heard the sound of something hitting the desk, probably a glass or an ashtray. Oh, and I can barely wait for this year to be over. Can barely wait to get rid of her, forget that night existed, forget that I had to pretend for 12 months that she meant something. The idea of having a child with her, a life sentence. Never. I'd rather die. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking so much I could barely stay standing, and it was only pure willpower that kept me from collapsing right there in the hallway. I put my hand on the wall to support myself, trying to breathe through the tears that wouldn't stop falling, and heard Marcus ask one more question that sealed my fate. "And if it happens," Marcus asked in a low voice, "accidentally, what would you do?" The pause that followed was so long I thought Gavin wouldn't answer, but then he said the words that destroyed any remnant of hope I still had stored. "It won't happen because I never touch that woman again. Ever. But if it did," another pause, more devastating than the previous one, "I'd demand a solution. A child complicates the divorce, ties me to her in ways that go beyond the contract, and I want freedom. From her. From this farce. From all of this. So no, Marcus. It won't happen. It can't happen." I ran. I didn't care if they could hear my hurried footsteps in the hallway. Didn't care about anything except getting out of there before they came out of the office and saw me completely shattered. I stumbled up the stairs, tears blurring my vision, and locked my bedroom door behind me before finally collapsing on the floor. I cried until I couldn't breathe properly, until my throat was raw and my eyes so swollen I could barely open them. Eventually, when there were no more tears left to shed, I dragged my body to the bed and lay on my side, my hand protective over my still flat stomach. "He'll never know," I whispered to the baby growing inside me, my voice hoarse and broken. "About you, ever. I'll protect you from him, from everything he could do. We'll run away when the contract ends, I promise. You'll have a mother who loves you more than anything, and that will be enough." It has to be enough. I stayed awake all night, making plans in my head, calculating every detail of how I would hide the pregnancy for the next months until the contract ended. It would be difficult, maybe impossible, but I would do anything to protect my baby from a father who preferred death to having him. And as I watched the sun rise through the window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I made a silent promise. Gavin Hogan would never know he had a child, not until I was far enough away that he couldn't hurt us.
It's hard to even judge Cecilia after the horrors Gavin said about her. Can this relationship really be beyond repair?
Chapter 4. Hiding the secret and suspicions grow.
When suspicion turns into truth?
Will it bring redemption?
Hiding a pregnancy from someone who lived in the same house as me proved infinitely more difficult than I imagined. The following weeks were a succession of careful lies, strategically loose clothing, and award-worthy performances whenever nausea threatened to betray me. I woke up praying that the morning sickness would wait for Gavin to leave, and I came to know every bathroom in the mansion by the quickest route. Clothes became my first defense, loose dresses, blouses that fell away from the body, coats even when unnecessary. The stylist suggested tighter pieces a few times, but I insisted on loose ones with excuses about comfort, and she eventually gave up. Food became another minefield because the nausea tortured me all day. In public, I ate the minimum, pushing food around the plate, and this caught Gavin's attention too quickly. He started watching me during dinners with an intensity that made me nervous, his eyes following every movement. The exhaustion was relentless, hitting me in waves that closed my eyes on their own. There were afternoons when I dozed off in the library and woke hours later disoriented, making up excuses when Gavin found me. He always frowned, but never commented directly, just looked at me with something between concern and suspicion. The charity gala happened when I was 6 weeks pregnant. The dark blue dress was loose at the waist, heavy makeup disguised my pallor. I looked at my reflection and forced the practiced smile, repeating the mantra, "Just a few more months, you can do this." The event was packed with important people talking about money while drinking expensive champagne. Gavin played the role of attentive husband, hand on my waist in a public display of affection that made me want to pull back. But I relaxed against him and smiled for cameras. An animated investor offered us champagne with a smile too wide, clearly already drunk. "Celebrate with us. The merger is an absolute success thanks to you." Gavin accepted his glass and waited for me to do the same, but I looked at the golden liquid and felt my stomach turn violently. Alcohol was out of the question. "No, thank you," I managed to say, smiling. "Sensitive stomach today. Something I ate didn't sit well." The investor walked away stumbling, but I felt Gavin's eyes on me, heavy and analytical. I pretended not to notice, but during the rest of the night I felt his attention returning to me repeatedly, as if trying to solve a puzzle. It wasn't the first alcohol refusal, and each one seemed to register in his mind as more evidence that something was wrong. The night was ending when the nausea I kept controlled finally won. I felt the sickness rising too fast and murmured an excuse before running to the bathroom, hand over my mouth. I managed to lock the stall before vomiting violently, and I stayed kneeling on the cold floor trying to catch my breath. When I came out after washing my face and redoing my makeup, Gavin was waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "You're sick," he said, and it wasn't a question. "Third time in 2 weeks you've thrown up or refused a drink. What's going on, Cecilia?" I forced a smile. "Just a persistent virus, nothing serious. It's already getting better." He didn't look convinced, but there were people around. "Let's go home. You need to rest." The ride back was tense in a different way than usual, because for the first time Gavin seemed genuinely worried instead of just irritated. He kept looking at me during the entire trip, and I pretended to watch the city lights while feeling the weight of his gaze. "You need to see a doctor," he finally said. "This has happened too many times to be a simple virus. It could be something serious." Panic gripped my chest. "I don't need to. I'm fine. It's just stress." He was silent for a long moment. "You've changed a lot, Cecilia. It's not just physical. You're quieter, more observant, like you're keeping secrets you didn't even know you had before." The observation was dangerously perceptive. I turned to face him directly. "Maybe you never really saw me before. You decided I was an empty doll from day one, so that's what you saw. But people change when forced to survive in impossible situations, Gavin." He seemed genuinely surprised. The silence stretched until he returned to the previous subject. "Stress doesn't make you throw up 3 times in 2 weeks. Doesn't make you refuse alcohol when you used to accept it. You know what I noticed?" I interrupted before controlling myself. "Weeks of frustration finding an escape. At that event today, you were negotiating with the group from Asia, right? The investors from Singapore who want to expand the partnership." Gavin frowned, confused. "I was... How did you... You were agreeing with their terms too quickly," I continued, turning completely in the seat. "I saw it. Everyone saw you nodding positively, making that smile you use when you want someone to feel secure. But what no one else noticed is that you didn't sign anything. No papers, no preliminary agreement, nothing." The car slowed down as Gavin looked at me with surprise and something that could be respect. "Continue." "You're using the same strategy my father used 3 years ago with European investors," I explained, feeling strange satisfaction in finally demonstrating I wasn't an idiot. "You let them think they're winning, that you're easy to convince, that the deal is practically closed. They get confident, relax, start talking more freely, revealing information they wouldn't reveal if they knew you were still analyzing. And then, when you have all the necessary data, you'll come back with a counteroffer that will catch them completely off guard." Gavin stopped pretending to look at the road and faced me completely. There was genuine admiration in his eyes now. "Kia, how do you know this?" "Because I paid attention," I replied, letting hurt leak into the words. "While everyone, including you, thought I was just a spoiled princess, I was observing, learning. My father took me to events since I was 15, and I absorbed every conversation, every negotiation, every strategy. He would teach me afterward, at home, explaining power dynamics, psychological games, methods of subtle manipulation. I just never had permission to demonstrate it because everyone had already decided what my role was. The silence that followed was different from any other, loaded with fundamental reassessment. Gavin looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, all his assumptions about me being destroyed and rebuilt. "You're right," he finally said, humility in the admission, "about the strategy, about everything. I was doing exactly that, and I thought no one would have noticed, especially not the dumb doll," I completed, without anger, just tiredness. "I know what you think of me, Gavin. You made it very clear." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but just nodded. The rest of the trip passed in contemplative silence, but I felt that something had fundamentally changed. 2 weeks later, at 8 weeks pregnant, my body rebelled in a way that could no longer be hidden. We were at an even bigger event, full of international investors and press cameras. I was talking to an investor when I felt the world spin. I tried to concentrate, maintain the smile, but my vision blurred at the edges and I felt my legs give out. "Gavin," I whispered, and everything went black. I woke up on the couch in the side room. Gavin kneeling beside me, holding my hand with painful force. His face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "Cecilia, thank God, you fainted. You scared me." I tried to sit up, but he kept me lying down. "You're going to the hospital now, non-negotiable." At the hospital, the same doctor who confirmed my pregnancy examined me, and when our eyes met, I saw immediate recognition. He checked my pressure and asked questions while I silently begged him not to reveal the secret. "She's dehydrated," the doctor announced to Gavin. "Severe stress. She needs to rest, fewer events, better nutrition and hydration." "That's it?" Gavin questioned suspiciously. "Nothing more serious?" "Sometimes the body responds to stress dramatically. Mrs. Hogan needs to slow down. If symptoms persist, she should come back for more tests." Gavin appeared in my line of vision, expression mixing relief and frustration. "Let's go home. You're going to rest." At the mansion, he surprised me by carrying me in his arms up the stairs, ignoring protests. "Be quiet," he murmured, depositing me on the bed, and there was something almost gentle in his touch. "Fad, I'll have soup made." When he came back 20 minutes later, personally carrying the tray, I thought I was hallucinating. "Cook left," he explained with a slight blush. "I heated it in the microwave." It was the first time he had done something for me not related to appearances. I started eating while he sat watching with nervous intensity. "About what I said in the car," he began after a long silence, voice softer. "About observing, learning. I was an idiot to assume you were just superficial." I swallowed the soup and looked directly at him. "Everyone assumes that. The difference is that now you've seen you were wrong." He was silent, then leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "I don't know what I feel about you, but hate isn't the right word, and I don't want you to suffer, or get sick, or die. Understand?" "Why do you care now?" I asked, confusion and pain leaking out. "Because maybe I was unfair," he responded, vulnerability in his voice. "And maybe I'm starting to see that the woman I married isn't who I thought, and that changes things in ways I don't know how to process." I finished the soup in silence. When he got up to leave, he stopped at the door. "Rest. No events this week. Maybe next week too. You need to recover." The door closed, and I was alone, my hand automatically on my still flat stomach, processing everything. Gavin had seen a side of me I kept hidden, and that changed something between us in a way I didn't know if it was good or dangerous. "What's happening?" I whispered to the empty room, with no answers, just confusion and dangerous hope I should crush before it took root. Chapter 5. Truth Revealed and Brutal Confrontation.
Can love survive after words that were meant to destroy?
The week that followed the fainting at the event was strangely calm, almost strangely peaceful in a way that kept me constantly on alert, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Gavin kept his promise to cancel the events, and for the first time since we had gotten married, I spent entire days at the mansion without having to pretend to be happy for an audience of investors thirsty for stability. The silence between us changed from hostile to something more contemplative, as if we were both processing the conversation in the car and reassessing assumptions we had built about each other. I took advantage of the time to truly rest, following the doctor's orders to hydrate and eat properly, always with a protective hand over the stomach that was beginning to show the first signs of change. The pregnancy advanced relentlessly, and I knew that soon I wouldn't be able to hide it anymore, no matter how loose the clothes I wore were. The thought terrified me because it meant I would have to accelerate the escape plans, would have to start saving money and making concrete preparations for when the contract finally ended. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, while I was in the library flipping through a book I could barely process, that I heard the sound of an agitated arrival downstairs. Animated voices echoed through the hallway, and I immediately recognized Marcus's deep voice mixed with another female voice I didn't know. Vibrant and full of energy, in a way that seemed completely out of place in the mansion's somber atmosphere. My curiosity was piqued, but I remained where I was, knowing I would eventually find out who had arrived. It didn't take long. Quick footsteps came up the staircase, and then the library door opened with such force it hit the wall, revealing a woman who could only be Gavin's sister. She was tall, dark hair cut in modern layers, eyes that shone with sharp intelligence, and a huge smile that lit up her entire face when she saw me sitting there. "Oh, you must be Cecilia," she practically shouted, crossing the room in long strides and pulling me into a hug before I could react. "Finally, I'm Isla, the traveling and irresponsible sister that no one can locate for more than 2 weeks in a row. Sorry for not coming earlier. I was in Thailand without signal and only found out about the wedding when I got back to civilization." I was completely stunned by the hurricane of energy that was Isla Hogan, so different from the cold and controlled brother that I could barely process they shared the same DNA. She released me and held me by the shoulders, examining me with perceptive eyes that seemed to see much more than I would like. "So you look terrible," she declared with the brutal frankness that was apparently a family trait. "Pale, too thin, sunken eyes. What did my idiot brother do to you? Because I swear, if he's being the monster I know he can be, I'm going to hit him with something heavy." I couldn't help but laugh because the image of someone hitting Gavin Hogan with anything was too absurd. "No," I managed to say, still processing the whirlwind that had invaded my peaceful afternoon. He's being less awful lately." Isla frowned, clearly not satisfied with the answer. "Less awful isn't a compliment, honey. That's the lowest bar that exists." She sat down next to me on the couch, turning her body completely to face me. "Tell me, everything. I don't believe the romantic story the tabloids are selling, so I want the truth. What's really going on here?" I hesitated, because opening up to someone I had just met went against all the self-preservation instincts I had developed in recent weeks. But there was something about Isla, a direct honesty and a warm energy that made me want to trust her in a way I hadn't trusted anyone since my father died. "It's complicated," I began carefully, choosing my words. "The marriage was arranged to save the companies after my father's death. It wasn't exactly my choice." Isla's eyes widened, and then she let out a series of creative profanities that would make a sailor blush. "That idiot," she muttered, more to herself than to me, "and I bet Marcus it was true love. I lost $50 because of our brother's emotional incapacity. Despite everything, I laughed again, and it was liberating in a way I didn't expect." We continued talking for hours, and gradually I revealed more details about the situation, about the 1-year contract, about the torturous duality of pretending in public and being ignored in private. Isla listened to everything with growing attention, her expression going from amused to genuinely worried. "You need to get out of here," she finally said, taking my hand. "As soon as the contract ends, you need to leave and rebuild your life away from all this craziness." It was at that moment that I felt the familiar nausea rise, and before I could control myself, I brought my hand to my mouth. Isla watched me with eyes that suddenly became very perceptive, very analytical, and I saw the exact moment she connected all the dots I had tried so desperately to hide. "Wait," she said slowly. her eyes dropping to my stomach and then returning to my face. "You're pregnant." It wasn't a question, it was a statement loaded with absolute certainty, and I felt panic grip my chest. I tried to deny it, opened my mouth to invent another convincing lie, but the tears came before the words. And then I was crying in the arms of a woman I had met less than 2 hours ago. Hey, Isla murmured, holding me tight. "It's okay. Secret's safe, I promise. I'm your ally now, not his. But you need to tell me everything because this completely changes the situation." And then I told her everything. The forced marriage, Gavin's brutal coldness, that night in the office when the barriers had fallen, his cruel regret the next morning, and finally, the devastating words I had heard through the door when I was about to reveal the pregnancy. Each word came out as if it were being torn from inside me, and when I finished I was exhausted and trembling. Isla was silent for a long moment, processing everything I had revealed, and when she finally spoke, there was a cold anger in her voice that was terrifying. "That absolute idiot," she said through clenched teeth. "I'm going to kill him, slowly, with my own hands." "No," I murmured, wiping the tears. "I don't want him to know. Ever. I'm going to run away when the contract ends, and he'll never find out he has a child." Isla looked at me with an expression that mixed understanding and sadness. "Cecilia, I understand why you want that. After what you heard, it makes total sense. But I need to tell you some things about my brother that might explain, not justify but explain, why he is the way he is." She took a deep breath before continuing, and I saw the old pain in her eyes. "Our father died when Gavin was 10. Brain aneurysm, no warning, just dropped dead one day. Our mother couldn't handle the pain and abandoned us 6 months later. She just left a note saying she couldn't look at us anymore because we reminded her too much of him." I felt my heart tighten with the revelation, imagining a 10-year-old child facing such devastating losses. Isla continued, her voice becoming softer. "Gavin was 15 when he took total responsibility for us. Marcus was 13, I was 8. He worked, studied, built the empire from nothing while raising us. Never complained, never showed weakness, but the price was that he completely shut down emotionally. He's afraid," she finally said, looking directly into my eyes, "of feeling, of losing, of being abandoned again. And what he said about you, those horrible words you heard, it was defense. He felt something real that night with you, and it terrified him so much that he attacked you to protect himself. It's his pattern. It always has been." I listened to everything in silence, processing the information that cast a completely different light on the man I had learned to hate. It didn't justify the cruelty, but it explained where it came from. And some part of me I didn't want to admit felt a pang of empathy for the abandoned boy who grew up building walls around his heart. "Even so," I said with a firm voice, "it doesn't change what he said, that he'd rather die than have a child with me. I'm not going to risk my baby being rejected by a father who doesn't want him." Isla nodded slowly, as if she expected exactly that answer. "Okay, so we have a plan. I stay here with you as your friend and support. I watch Gavin, see if he really changes, if he shows signs that he's working through his own emotional barriers. If he changes, genuinely changes and demonstrates he can be human, we tell him. If not," she squeezed my hand, "I help you run away. Money, documents, tickets, safe place to live, whatever you need." The relief I felt was so intense, it almost knocked me down. For the first time since I discovered the pregnancy, I wasn't completely alone. I had an ally, someone who understood the complexity of the situation and was willing to help me regardless of the outcome. "Thank you," I whispered, and the words seemed completely inadequate for the gratitude I felt. "You're welcome," Isla responded with a smile that was both fierce and protective. "Now rest, eat something, and let me deal with my idiot brother." Watching Isla march down the hallway toward Gavin's office was simultaneously terrifying and satisfying. I stayed hidden at the top of the staircase, not wanting to miss the explosion that was about to happen, and I didn't have to wait long. The office door opened with a bang that echoed through the entire mansion, and Isla's voice thundered with an anger that made even me back away. "Gavin Hogan." "Isla," I heard my husband's tired voice. "What now?" Cecilia, she practically screamed. You're treating her like absolute trash. Marcus told me everything about how you are with her. Cold, cruel, monstrous. What kind of man marries someone and then treats her like she's less than nothing? There was a pause, and then Gavin responded with a controlled but tense voice. This is a business arrangement, Isla. It's not love. It's not business. Her interruption was explosive. She's a person who's clearly suffering, who fainted at a public event because you stress her out so much that her body is shutting down, and you have the audacity to call this business. I heard the sound of something hitting the desk, probably Gavin losing his patience. You don't understand the situation. You don't know the details. So don't come here judging me about things you don't understand. I know you, Isla shot back, and her voice became softer, but no less intense. I know you better than anyone's, Gavin. I know how you shut down when you feel something real, how you attack people to keep them away before they can hurt you first. I've seen you do this your whole life. The silence that followed was so long I thought the conversation was over, but then Gavin spoke, and there was a vulnerability in his voice that rarely showed. What if I don't know how to be different? What if this is all I'm capable of being? Then you learn, Isla responded firmly. You fight your own demons and learn, because Gavin, I've seen how you look at her when you think no one's watching. I saw the concern when she fainted, the panic in your eyes. You feel something for her, you're just too afraid to admit it. I heard footsteps in the office, someone pacing back and forth. What if it's too late? Gavin asked, his voice so low I could barely hear it. What if I've already hurt her too much to fix it? Life is too short to waste on fear, Isla said, and there was a sadness in her voice that made me think she was remembering the mother who abandoned them. Mom taught us that when she left, don't make the same mistake she did, letting fear control your decisions. Don't waste a good person because of your own terror of being happy. The door opened and closed, and then Isla was beside me at the top of the staircase, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I planted the seed, she said softly. Now let's see if it grows into something real, or if it withers and dies like everything he touches when he's afraid. We returned to my room in silence, and I spent the rest of the night wondering if Gavin was really capable of change, or if the abandoned boy who built ice walls around his heart was hopelessly lost in his own defense. Chapter 6. Redemption and True Love.
Is love worth the risk? Even after it almost broke you?
The days that followed Isla's conversation with Gavin brought subtle but undeniable changes. He started showing up in the mornings with coffee, asking how I had slept with a voice that no longer carried the usual coldness. He smiled sometimes, small smiles that seemed genuine instead of rehearsed for cameras. I didn't know how to process this version of him, so I just watched cautiously, protecting my heart and my secret with equal ferocity. When the event at the 10th week of pregnancy arrived, my belly was small but visibly rounded if someone looked carefully. I chose the loosest dress I had, but during the night I felt the familiar nausea rise. I ran to the bathroom, and I was vomiting when I heard the door open behind me. Cecilia, Gavin's voice echoed in the empty bathroom. Enough. Truth. Now. What are you hiding? I wiped my mouth with trembling hands, trying to formulate another lie, but when I turned around, he was looking at me in a way that cut through all defenses. His eyes dropped, fixing on the subtle curve of my stomach under the dress, and I saw the exact moment he connected all the dots he had been ignoring. "You're pregnant," he said. And it wasn't a question, it was devastating recognition. I froze, the secret I had kept so carefully finally exposed. "No, I don't lie." His voice came out broken, almost pleading. "Please, you are. How long?" The tears came before I could stop them. 10 weeks! Gavin leaned against the wall as if his legs had failed, his face completely pale. 10 weeks. That night. It's mine. The silence was my confirmation, and I saw pain cross his face. "Why didn't you tell me? Weeks, Cecilia. You knew and hid it from me." Something inside me broke completely, and all the anger and pain I had kept stored exploded. "Because I heard you with Marcus. I'd never be that foolish. Having a child with me, that night was a mistake, that I'm empty, superficial, that you can barely wait to get rid of me. The tears ran freely now, uncontrollable. You said if I got pregnant, you'd demand a solution. So yes, I hid it, to protect my child from you. The devastation on his face was absolute. Cecilia, I was lying. Lying? To myself. He ran his hands through his hair, desperate. That night with you was the best of my life, and it terrified me, because I felt something real for the first time in years. Since my mother abandoned us, I swore I'd never feel again, because feeling hurts, people leave, die, abandon. So I attacked you with cruel words to protect myself. He took a step toward me, his eyes shining with tears I had never seen in him. But Cecilia, I love you. I've loved you for weeks, and didn't know how to fix what I broke. How to prove I changed. You destroyed me, I whispered, the pain so intense I could barely breathe. With every word, I don't know if I can forgive. Gavin kneeled right there, on the bathroom floor, and the gesture was so unexpected, it made me choke on a sob. Then don't forgive yet, but let me try. Prove I changed, that I love you, our child, please. I'm begging. Give me one chance. One, to be the real husband you deserve. The father our baby needs. I looked at him, vulnerable and broken at my feet, and saw not the cold monster who had hurt me, but the scared man Isla had described. You have to prove it, I finally said, my voice trembling. Not words, actions, a lot of time, work. I will. Everything, however long it takes. He kissed my hand with reverence. And Cecilia, no more pretending, public or private, only real. I love you in front of everyone. Always, I promise. The months that followed were a transformation I wouldn't have believed possible. Gavin attended every medical appointment, holding my hand and crying when he saw the baby on the ultrasound for the first time. We decorated the nursery together, and I laughed when he tried to assemble the crib and failed miserably, cursing the instructions in 3 different languages. In public, he stopped pretending completely, kissing me with real passion and openly declaring I love my wife to shocked investors who had never seen him display genuine emotion. At night he held me, talking to my growing belly, making promises to our baby about being the father he himself never had. Isla watched everything with evident pride, whispering to me that she had never seen her brother so human, so alive. The birth happened after 14 brutal hours of labor, with Gavin holding my hand through every contraction, absorbing every cruel word I screamed while swearing eternal love back. When the doctor finally announced, "It's a girl," and placed the crying baby in my arms, I saw Gavin cry openly for the first time. "She's perfect," he whispered with a broken voice, gently touching our daughter's tiny cheek. "Layla," I said, looking at him, "like your mother. To remember that love is worth the risk." His tears fell faster. "You remembered what I told you about her." "I remember everything you trust me to tell." I held his face with my free hand. "And Gavin, I love you, too. Finally. For real." He kissed me deeply, carefully, conscious of the baby between us. "I love you so much. You, Layla. Our family. Best thing that ever happened to me. Even starting out horrible. Especially because of that." Gavin smiled through the tears. "It made me fight, change, be better for you." I looked at our daughter sleeping peacefully, then at the man who had destroyed me and then rebuilt me into something better, and finally understood that sometimes the best stories start out messy.
Final reflection. Writing the script for this video was an intense emotional journey. I wanted to explore something beyond traditional romance, dive into the darker layers of fear and self-preservation. Cecilia and Gavin were born from a simple question. What if the people who need love most were exactly the ones who push it away the most? The creative process took me to uncomfortable places. Gavin is neither villain nor hero. He's too human, broken by abandonments that shaped every cruel defense. Cecilia isn't a passive victim. She's an intelligent survivor protecting what she loves. The hidden pregnancy became the perfect metaphor for the secrets we keep when trust has been destroyed. The central lesson is about choice. Trauma doesn't justify cruelty, but it explains it. And every day we choose, build walls or bridges, protect wounds or risk healing. True love isn't magic. It's conscious work by two people deciding, repeatedly, to be better. Sometimes the most beautiful stories begin in the most broken places, because that's where we truly learn what it means to rebuild. And if you want to see more truly deep stories, click on the video appearing on your screen now.